Good morning, everybody. We're starting lecture 5.1 today. We're doing it a little bit early. I've put this in early for you so that we can have a bit more time to review for the final exam. So your exam, as you know now, is on Saturday week, one day after the end of term. There are announcements on the course forum, both from me and William, concerning the final exam, what the timing is of the exam, also what is included in the exam. So make sure you read those announcements carefully. And make sure that you are ready to go with your appropriate, connection, so that you are able to log in and so forth. Make sure your internet connection is working in time for the exam. So you've got a number of assessment items next week, and then the exam on Saturday. And as I've said, all the announcements concerning the final assessments and the exam on the forum. So read those carefully. The reason we've put the lectures forward by a few days is so that everyone's got time to watch the lectures and review the final two topics. Our final two topics are topic 9, which is externalities. We'll be doing that today. And then on Monday, I'm going to do the final lecture at 10 o'clock. So you'll have all your lectures done by Monday, which means that you have the remainder of the week to watch those lectures and prepare for the assessment on the Saturday. So today we're doing externalities. This is a big topic, and it's a really important topic that governs lots of interventions. It informs lots of interventions by government into the market. We know that we've started with a model where we have a perfect market, where there's a demand curve and a supply curve, and it reaches equilibrium, and that's the point of maximum consumer surplus, producer surplus, and total surplus. We know all that. But in the real world, of course, is more complicated than that. So let's get into this area of externalities. Briefly, what an externality means is this. In any market, we start with two parties. The two parties are the demander and the supplier. So we've got two interested groups in the transaction. And when we do our demand and supply diagram, they are the only two parties involved in the transaction. But in fact, there may be other parties external to the transaction who are not buyers, who are not sellers, not part of demand, not part of supply, but who are nevertheless affected by the transaction. So we're going to do a couple of positive externalities and also negative externalities today when we look at this general topic. And we're also going to be thinking about ways that government can intervene into the market to kind of correct for the externalities. Normally, we might say that where the market arrives at its equilibrium, that is its most efficient point, and there's no dead weight loss. However, if externalities exist in that market, there may be a dead weight loss. And by intervening in the market, the government doesn't create a dead weight loss. It, in fact, gets rid of the dead weight loss. So I'll develop this theme a bit more as we get into our lecture. I'm going to transition to our lecture slides now, and then talk to you about the real world implications of externalities as we go through our lecture. So we'll go into our lecture notes now. So here we are on our topic of externalities. And an externality, when we're thinking about our externalities, we start with this idea of perfect competition. And in perfect competition, we assume everyone is a price taker, all goods are homogeneous. And here's the key one: we assume that there are no externalities in perfect competition. So this is the factor today where we say in the real world life is not perfect. This is the exception to perfect competition. We saw in other topics that in monopoly there are exceptions to perfect competition. In oligopoly there are exceptions to perfect competition. Monopoly, again, down the last point, there may be no free entry and exit. They are all exceptions to perfect competition. But the one that we're looking at today is the one that I've arrowed in black, and that is the issue of externalities. So there are externalities in many markets. So what actually is an externality? What actually is an externality? It's either a cost or a benefit to someone who is not a consumer or a producer of a given good. In other words, they are external to the transaction. They're not inside the transaction, they're outside the transaction where the good is bought or sold. So externalities can come about either through consumption or production. So let's think about our externalities in the area of consumption. We can have positive and negative externalities, and that positive externality can come about when someone consumes a product or when someone produces a product. A positive externality coming about because someone consumes a product or produces a product. So let me give you an example here. I'm going to talk to you about these two examples. How can someone gain from someone else consuming a product? So the example I want to give you here is the consumption of a vaccine. If you think about getting vaccinated for the flu or getting vaccinated for COVID or getting vaccinated for some other disease, if you are traveling to another country, who are you thinking about when you get the vaccination? Who you're thinking about is yourself. You're consuming the product, and you're consuming the product because you're going to get a benefit from that product. So that part's pretty straightforward. However, who else might benefit from you getting that vaccination? Well, I might benefit from you getting that vaccination because if I meet you, or if I'm sitting next to you on a train or some other form of transport, sitting next to you in a lecture theatre, if you have got the vaccine and you are not sick, then you don't give that vaccine to me. Now, I wasn't involved in the transaction, but I did benefit from the transaction. So when we're thinking about the total benefits of the transaction of a vaccine, what are the total benefits? Well, the total benefits are, first of all, the person getting the vaccine, and secondly, all the other people that person meets who won't be affected by the disease. What about a production externality? Well, again, we could go to vaccines and we could say that where a firm invests in making a vaccine, sure, there's a benefit to the consumer, but there may be a benefit to other firms because in the process of researching that vaccine, scientific discoveries might be made, and those scientific discoveries might then be useful in other forms of medicine. So there might be a benefit to the discovery of a flu vaccine that's got nothing to do with the flu, but it has a broader scientific effect somewhere else. So that's what we mean by a positive consumption externality, and also a positive production externality. When we go back to our slide in a minute, we'll also be thinking about negative consumption and negative production externalities. So I'm going to give you an example of a negative consumption externality. What about someone smoking a cigarette? When that person buys the cigarette, the transaction is between them and the cigarette seller. So there's a buyer and a seller. But what about the people who are not involved in buying or selling cigarettes? They have nothing to do with smoking. How might they be affected by that transaction? Well, I could be negatively affected by someone else who is consuming a cigarette, because I might be nearby them when they're smoking and I might be consuming their passive smoke, and that might aggravate my asthma or something, some other lung condition that I might have. So that's a negative consumption externality. So when people consume cigarettes, they're not just affecting themselves. We know that cigarettes are harmful to your health, but they're going to be harmful to other people. They're going to be harmful in the form of passive smoke, but a bigger way in which they might be harmful in an economic sense is this. When people smoke, they have a much higher likelihood of being sick. When they get sick, they need treatment. They go to hospital, they go to doctors, and of course, all of those resources require money. And people who are not smoking and who have nothing to do with smoking, may not even know a smoker, are still going to be paying taxes to treat those smokers when they check in with the health system for lung cancer or heart disease or other diseases that are associated with smoking. So that's a negative consumption externality. What's a negative production externality? Well, if you drive past a factory where there is smoke coming from the chimney of the factory, that is a perfect example of a negative production externality. Pollution is an example of a negative production externality because the firm is producing a good, they are supplying a good, they're supplying it to a demander, there's two people in that transaction, but if the factory is producing pollution, then other people are affected. A common example that we give in our course is by discussing the production of paint. There's demanders of paint, there's suppliers of paint, but when that supplier produces the paint, if they produce poisonous chemical emissions, that emission might find its way into a river, and down that river are other businesses who are trying to fish in that river or fish in the ocean. The fish are being killed by the chemicals from the paint factory. We say that is an externality, because those people fishing may not be buying paint. They've got nothing to do with the production of paint, but they are affected by the transaction, the paint transaction. So that's a negative production externality. So in each of those cases, there is a cost or a benefit that is not being counted in the market. And that's why we call it an externality. And that's why we're going to try and come up with some solutions to remedy that externality. So let's go back to our slides. So I've just spoken to you about positive externalities, and now we can just circle the negative externalities. This is an externality that comes about falls on other people, third parties, who didn't consume the product but are still negatively affected. And of course, the negative production externality usually comes about, or often comes about, because of emissions, pollution involved in the production of a product. So the example that we could think about is that illustrates both these points is if we think about the production of bees, and in particular the making of honey. So we've got the bees. The bees produce the honey. So there are buyers and sellers. There are buyers and sellers for honey. We know that there are buyers and sellers for honey. We just put a little demand and supply curve up. There's a demand for honey, and there's a supply of honey, quantity, price on our axes. And then if we think about the production and the demand and supply of honey, we also know that these bees, they have another effect, because if we've got a beehive and those bees then fly away from that beehive, maybe into the orchard next door, then those bees are not just producing honey, they may be producing some other crops. They may be producing apples or some other fruit, because those bees are not just benefiting the production of honey, they are benefiting the production of other products. So we would say that in this case, the honey creates a positive externality. It creates a positive externality for another product like fruit. So there is our production. That is our production positive externality. So it's a positive externality involved in the production of honey. And if we go back and then think about our previous slide, well, if demand indicates the benefit of a product, now we have the benefit coming from the honey. There's the benefit coming from the honey, the black line. But of course, there's also the benefit to the fruit. So in fact, the true benefit, or what we might call the social benefit, the total benefit, is actually to the right, because we're now counting all the benefits that come about from the production of honey. And it's not just the production of honey itself, but how it assists the production of other products. So that's the way a positive production externality should work. In other words, if we're thinking about how much we want bees and how much we want honey, we should also be thinking about the external effects that brings to us. All right, now, on the other hand, we can have negative externalities. Why is there a negative externality? Because if these beehives which make the honey are close to a preschool or a primary school, then now the production of honey now has a negative externality. It now has a negative externality. Why has it got a negative externality? Because when we make the honey, other people are, of course, negatively affected. So if those bees are flying over the fence of the beehive and flying off near the school and kids are getting stung, well, of course, that is now a negative externality. And how would we show this? Well, we would show it like this. We would say, here is the demand and supply curve for honey. Demand, supply, the supply curve of honey. This supply curve does show the cost of making the honey. However, now we see that these bee stings are negatively affecting children. That might indicate then that the true cost of making honey is actually higher. The social cost, if you like, of making honey is higher than the private cost. So I'll put a P here, and we've got a shift in this line. The line shifts up. What's the difference between line number 1 and line number 2? The difference between line number 1 and line number 2 is the negative externality. So we're, of course, measuring how big these negative externalities is. That can often be a more complicated business. How would you price the impact of a bee sting? We'd know. We could price what its medical impact is, but it's a bit harder to price in just the effect of being stung. All right, so that's the concept. That's the concept. So when we think about these positive and negative externalities, we have some examples in the textbook. So these are not my examples. They come from Alberto and Isabella, who wrote our text. But I'm going to use their illustrations anyway. So imagine that we have two people in our little model, and the first person is Maya, and Maya is going to demand perfume. All right, Maya is going to demand perfume, and now why does Maya demand perfume? Because she is thinking about, how much do I like perfume? What's the marginal benefit to me, right? What's the marginal benefit to me when I consume the perfume? And she's weighing that up against the price of the perfume. How much am I prepared to pay for the perfume? Now, there's another person. This person is called Benji. And Benji is sitting next to Maya in the lecture theatre or somewhere where he meets Maya's Maya. And he also, right, he's got some attraction to Maya, and some of that attraction to Maya has got to do with her wearing the perfume. So he likes the perfume that Maya's wearing, Maybe Benji and Maya are boyfriend and girlfriend, something like that. So Maya has a marginal benefit of the perfume, but Benji also has a marginal benefit of the perfume. So if we add those two together, we could say that is the marginal benefit, the social marginal benefit. So S meaning social, the true marginal benefit of Maya wearing this perfume is not just to Maya, but of course it also flows to Benji. So we then move to just our definition here. So in this case, there's a positive consumption externality. It represents a benefit to someone who is not involved in the transaction, right? E.g., Benji. All right, so Benji is getting this positive externality. And on the right-hand side, what we have is an indication of the marginal benefit of the product. We have the indication of the marginal benefit of the product. You can see that as the price of the product goes down, each time the price of the product goes down, each time the price of the product goes down, the consumption goes up. So this is the curve on the right. I'm just going to delete this line. The curve on the right, which is a discrete curve. In other words, at every different price level, Maya then buys another unit of the product. So the one on the right, the demand curve on the right, is Maya's curve, but the one on the left is the social curve. Now, why is the one on the left the social curve? Because the orange line, which I'm indicating, or the orange line I'm indicating, does not just indicate the demand curve for the demand curve by Maya, it indicates the demand curve for Maya plus Benji. What's the difference between curve 1 and curve 2? The difference between curve 1 and curve 2 at any different level of output is $2. And that $2 is the extra marginal benefit coming about from Benji. So Maya is the blue curve and Benji is the difference between the blue curve. Benji is the difference between the blue curve and the orange curve. So Benji's marginal benefit equals $2. So Benji values every unit that Maya consumes at $2. Now we go down to the next line and we see that the price of the product is $8. So the price of the product is $8. At that $8, Maya, if we follow that out here, Maya is going to consume 4 units of the product. So that's if we just consider Maya's production, Maya's consumption of this product, Maya is going to buy 4 units. But if we go over to the other side, we can see that at $8 the society would consume 6 units. Why would society consume 6 units? Because Maya sees a certain value in the consumption, but Benji also sees value in the consumption. So the difference between the blue line and the yellow line is the benefit of the product to Benji. And what are we to conclude from this? what would you conclude from this? I know this is a very weird sort of example, but what this example is basically going to show us is this. Maya will buy 4, but society, if we think about Maya and Benji together, want 6. So where there is a positive externality, this is the big lesson. Where there is a positive externality, goods, the free market, undersupplies the good. So where there is a positive externality, the good is undersupplied. Right? The product is under consumed and supplied. In other words, the free market output, the equilibrium is too low. That's what we're to consume. That's what we assume from a positive from positive externalities. The free market fails. That's our line of logic here. So there's a failure in the market. There's a failure in the market because only the personal benefit is being considered, and so we're underproducing the product. And how much is the market undersupplying the market by? It's undersupplying the market, in this case, by 2 units. How could the market correct this model? How could the market correct this model? We know that in the case of a positive externality, without accounting for the external benefit, we fail to get the maximum social surplus. So the invisible hand fails, and we call this market failure. This is the term market failure, where the market is designed to give us the maximum total surplus, but in fact it doesn't give us the total surplus. How could we solve this circumstance? We could solve this circumstance in this case by private negotiation. How would this private negotiation work? Well, Benji lets Maya know he likes the perfume. Maya offers to consume 2 extra units, which is what Benji wants her to do, 6 instead of 4, in exchange for Benji paying her the $2 per unit. In other words, he says, well, you normally buy 4, but for these last 2, I'm going to pay you $2 a unit. And in that case, Maya then consumes more of the units. And now we move to the equilibrium where there's $8 to spend on the product. There's $8 to spend on the product, and instead of and at $8, Maya will now buy 6 units of the product. Why will she buy 6 units of the product? Because she has more money to spend. Benji has now provided her with a subsidy towards this perfume. So this is an example where positive consumption externalities can be done by private negotiation, and this is called the Coase theorem. The Coase theorem involves no government intervening into this situation. It's just a negotiation between 2 people, and so this the 2 parties work the 2 parties work this situation out together. How could 2 parties work something like this in real life. In real life, my neighbour might have some trees that create shade into my property. I don't like that shade in my property. It keeps my property too dark. Every so often, my neighbour gets their tree trimmed, but they don't do it often enough, and my property is often too dark. So I could say to my neighbour, look, why don't I contribute some money for you to get your trees trimmed when you do it? And when you do it, I'll pay half the cost or a third of the cost, whatever. And then that will encourage my neighbour to do what I want them to do. And we've just worked that out between us. I get a benefit from when they trim their garden. They obviously get the benefit. That's why they're doing it. But they're going to do it more often if I make that offer to them. So we could work that out between us. So that's where two people can enter into a negotiation around sorting out an externality. Now, that isn't always the case, because in the case of many externalities, it might not be a situation between two people. It might involve millions of people. And under those circumstances, the government's going to get involved. So let's look at the negative externality example of two people sorting out an issue, and then we'll get into larger systems where more people are involved. Okay, so solutions for externalities. How can society solve the problems of externalities? Well, one is the Coase theorem. Right? One is the Coase theorem. If a trade in an externality is possible, then there are no transaction costs. Bargaining can lead to an efficient outcome regardless of the allocation of property rights. I'm going to get into this area of property rights at the end of the lecture. So positive consumption externalities can come from all these sorts of activities, and sometimes they can be solved by individuals. Sometimes it requires governments to solve them. So I'm going to come back to the role of government when we get past Benji and Myer in our next example. Now we've got a negative production externality. Benji sells hot dogs. Maya is no longer his girlfriend. She is just someone who lives nearby where he produces the hot dogs. Maya dislikes the pollution coming from Benji's operation. So when Benji is producing his hot dog, Benji is only ever thinking about Benji. He's not thinking about the external party to his transaction. He's there trying to make a profit, and all he is really concerned about is himself. He's concerned about Benji. But then when we think of the cost, there's another cost. Benji's cost of producing the hot dogs involves the various inputs into making the hot dogs. But the other cost, which is not being considered in this transaction, is Maya's cost of the smell of the hot dogs. Maya may never buy a hot dog. In fact, she probably, if she doesn't like the smell, she probably won't buy them either. But she's still affected by the production of the hot dog. So this is an example of a negative production externality. It represents the cost. Who's the cost to in this case? M-A-I-A, is that how we spell it? That's the negative production effect on Maya. If we think about this example here, this is Benji's, on the left-hand side, this is Benji's marginal cost curve. Over here, we have the social marginal cost curve. So we have Benji's marginal cost on the left, Maya's on the right. And of course, marginal cost is rising anyway. So this is the sort of the shape of our supply curve that I've just superimposed there. But of course, there's another, in addition to Benji, and remember Benji is in orange. So in addition to Benji's supply curve, there is also another marginal cost curve. And the difference between those two curves is $1. There's a $1 marginal cost. In other words, every time Benji makes a hot dog, Maya has some inconvenience because she hates the smell of the hot dog, and so she values this. Product that this inconvenience at $1 per hot dog. How do we ever get to that number? Well, we'd have to see how Benji and Maya negotiate with each other. But notionally, we have a $1 figure per hot dog. That's how much inconvenience it's creating. And so, if we think about how many hot dogs Benji would produce, if we looked at the previous case, at $4, I think it's at $4, Benji's going to produce 4 units of the product. But if we count the true marginal cost, the efficient level of outcome would be 2 units. Sorry, I have to correct what I just said. I'm going back to the previous diagram. Sorry. Benji is going to produce, normally Benji is not going to produce 4. He's going to produce at $3. At $3, he's going to produce 3 units. But if we count the true costs, then at the same $3, the efficient level of outcome is 2. And so what's going on here? More goods are being produced than should be produced. How many more goods are being produced than should be produced? The answer is 1 more. So when we say that there is negative production externalities, right, when there is negative production externalities, the quantity produced in the market is above the quantity that should be produced, which we call the optimum quantity. So we spoke about positive externalities leading to an undersupply of a product, and then where we have a negative externality, then this produces an oversupply of the product. There's too many of these goods being produced. Why are too many of these goods being produced? Because we're not counting all the costs. We're not counting in here. We're not counting the social cost of the product. We're not counting the social cost. With negative externalities, making consumption decisions without accounting for the external cost doesn't allow for the true social surplus. The social optimum is 2, so there's an oversupply because the private optimal production is 3. So we've got an oversupply of the product. How could this issue be solved? Again, this could be solved between the two of them. Right? This could be solved between the two of them. There's a negative production externality. Maya knows that Maya lets Benji know that she dislikes the production. They then can start negotiating. In the end, Benji offers to decrease production by 1 unit, every time Maya pays him $1. So under those circumstances, Benji's supply curve now becomes equal to the social supply curve. Let's go back here and just clean this diagram up, and I'll show you what I mean here. We can see that on the left, Benji's curve is below Maya's curve. How much below Maya's curve is it? This is Benji's curve coming through as I show you. Here's the social curve here. But now Benji has to pay Maya $1 every time he makes a hot dog. So that now this private curve was different to the social curve, but now they're the same because Benji now has another cost. Benji has to now not only pay for producing hot dogs, he also has to pay Maya $1 every time he does it. And that shifts his curve up. And so Benji will now make an efficient decision. His true cost of production reflects an output of 2 rather than 3. And so he'll make that decision. He'll come to a more efficient market decision. So what are some examples of negative externalities? Well, the big one, of course, is global warming, where we get too much production. Excuse this brief interruption here. All right, so global warming, of course, is a big negative production externality, and clearly could not be worked out between individuals. Governments will be needing to get involved here. Excessive risk-taking, like speeding, for example. This is going to be a negative production externality because, for example, if people are speeding in their car, risk-taking, then that's going to cause risks not only to them. When people are undertaking risky activities, they're only thinking about the danger to themselves. But in fact, there are risks to other people as well. Overfishing is another example, right, where a person who is fishing, of course, they're only considering their personal benefit in taking the fish and selling the fish. But in terms of society, then there's a lot of costs to other people as well, because fish stocks drop and over time the species become endangered. So these are examples of negative production externalities. How can society solve the problems? How can we solve the problems of negative externalities? We solve the problem of negative externalities by we can do it through where individuals can negotiate. We have the Coase theorem, but often that is not possible. I'm coming back to the Coase theorem to give you a more specific example of this at the end of the lecture, but we're going to move on now beyond the Coase theorem once we've put our definition up once more. If the trade in an externality is possible, then there are no transaction costs. What do transaction costs mean? Transaction costs might mean, e.g., in order to negotiate with you, I might need a lawyer. And so what that means is that I don't only need to pay money to compensate the other party, I also need to pay the lawyer. And that is going to distort the actual cost of negotiation. So where those things don't exist, bargaining will lead to an efficient level regardless of the property rights. Okay, now that's the Coase theorem. However, when we come to much bigger markets, it's not possible for people to negotiate individually. Governments often then need to be involved in the sorting out into the resolution of large-scale externalities. So before we get into that, let's just revise what the market theory is. The market theory is that there will be a supply curve, and that supply curve, what will it equal? It'll equal the marginal cost of the product to the person, to the producer. And there'll be a demand curve, and what will that equal? It will equal the reservation price. But what does that equal? That equals to the marginal benefit, or what we also call the marginal utility of the buyer. And when we arrive at equilibrium, we show our equilibrium price and quantity. And what is good about this point? What's good about the free market equilibrium in theory? Is that for every good produced out to Q, the marginal benefit, the red line, is greater than the price. And so that's why we have consumer surplus. And not only that, the marginal cost of the product is lower than the price. And that's what gives us a producer surplus and a consumer surplus. That's where they come from. And every good out to the equilibrium has a marginal benefit which is greater than the marginal cost. And that's why there is a surplus. That's why a surplus exists. And that's why we say that equilibrium is the most efficient point. And that will remain true as long as there's no externalities. Because what we're assuming when we look at this marginal cost is we are assuming that this marginal cost is the true marginal cost. Now, the question is it the true marginal cost? Because if we're not counting a social cost, then it's not the true marginal cost. And that's why we have to then change our diagrams to reflect any externalities. So let's think about externalities in large markets. Where there is a marginal, where there's a positive externality, in the case of a positive externality, for example, in the case of a vaccine, we might have a private equilibrium quantity, a market equilibrium quantity, and our quantity might be at Q and our price might be at P. But if we're then thinking about the external benefits to other people of the vaccine, we then say the true marginal benefit is the red line, and the social optimum, O, which I've just circled, that is the efficient level of outcome. In other words, it would be more efficient if our quantity was at QO, not at Q. And it would be more efficient if our price was at P and not at P1. I'll label that there. Or should I say PO, the optimum price. So the true or the optimum output is different to the market output, and that's why we say that the market output, QM and PM, does not reflect all the costs and benefits, and therefore the market is failing. This is market failure, the failure of the market to represent all the costs and benefits. If we're thinking about on the right-hand diagram, if there is a negative externality in the production of a good, the free market will produce at QM for market and price the product at PM. But in fact, the true cost of production is higher. The true cost of production is the red line. And so the optimum price would be PO and the optimum quantity would be QO. And if we look at the diagram on the left, then we'd say that the market quantity is below the optimum quantity. So the good is being underproduced, whereas in the diagram on the right, the market quantity, QM, the market quantity, I've made a mistake here, forgive me. I'm going to correct this. The optimum quantity, and in the quantity on the left, the optimum quantity is greater than the market quantity. The good is being underproduced. And then in the case on the right, the market quantity is greater than the optimum quantity. And so the good is being underproduced. Those are the big takeouts when we're looking at these externalities. So if we're thinking about this product that I'm about to circle in green, if we look at the product that we've just drawn a green box around, governments would have to think about ways of getting that output to grow. How are we going to get this output to grow? And in the case of the product on the left, governments would be thinking about how are we going to get this product to be produced less. So, solutions to these externalities. How can society solve these? Where externalities are, in fact, large numbers of people, individual negotiation is not possible. In other words, the Coase theorem will not work. And in this case, then, we need government policies to attempt to address the issue of these externalities. So Coase theorem doesn't apply anymore. So I'm going to take two examples here. I'll just see what my next slide is here. Okay, yes. So very quickly, let me revise what's gone on in this case. What we see in front of us is a diagram just trying to make my diagram just a tiny bit smaller. That's not working for me. I'll go with the existing diagram. Okay, so what we've got in front of us, first of all, is a positive consumption externality. A positive consumption externality. Positive consumption externality. And the example I'll put here is vaccines. I've already explained to you why a vaccine would be a positive consumption externality. When a person is getting vaccinated, they have a demand curve for the product. They have a demand curve. I'm showing that. I'm running my line over the original demand curve. The equilibrium will be at M. The equilibrium, I'll circle the equilibrium in black. The equilibrium will be at M. The price will be at P, and the quantity will be at Q. That's the market price and the market quantity. Now, the government recognises that there is an externality. They recognise that the equilibrium quantity is out here at QO. And the question is, how are they going to get that quantity out there? How are they going to get more people vaccinated? That's what we want. We want more people vaccinated so that disease is less of an issue in our society. So how are we going to do this? So we come down to the next diagram, and the answer is this. One way for government to do this would be provide a subsidy to, I'm going to go to the next diagram first, and then I'll come back to how we really do it. So one way is to provide a subsidy to the consumer. So imagine that we have our original demand curve and our original supply curve. Here's our demand. Here's our supply. Here is QM. Here is PM. But we know that our actual quantity, our actual optimum quantity is out there, right? We want our actual quantity out there. So one way that the government could do this is to give a subsidy to the consumer, right? Give the subsidy to the consumer. In other words, right, when you go to the doctor, you maybe get a $20 rebate every time, a refund from Medicare or from government when you get vaccinated. So $20 to the patient when they go and get a vaccine. So now what that means is the patient has more money to spend. So because they have more money to spend, because the government's giving them $20, it moves the demand curve out here, moves the demand curve to D2. And now we have a new equilibrium, and that equilibrium is equal to QO. The price that they're paying to the doctor will be more, but of course, they're not really paying PO. They're not really paying PO. What they are paying is this. They're paying PO minus the subsidy. So they are paying PO minus the subsidy. So minus the subsidy. So the true price is green for them. The true price is the green price. And that is why they move their consumption out to QO. Because they know that they're paying PO to the government, but they're also getting this amount that I'm indicating with the red arrow back from the government. So what's this amount between D1 and D2? That's the $20. All right, that's the $20 coming back to the consumer when they buy the product. So that's one way for the government to do it. The other way for the government to do it is not to give the subsidy to the patient, but to give it to the doctor. So here we have demand and supply. Here is our market equilibrium. Here's our market price. And the government knows that the optimum quantity is bigger. The optimum quantity is bigger. I'll put that over here in QO. The optimum quantity is bigger. It wants the quantity to come out to the red level. So what the government could do is to say, at the moment, the supply curve is indicated by S1, but if we give a subsidy to the doctor, the the doctor's marginal cost now falls. So the red arrow indicates the amount of subsidy going to the doctor. There is now a new equilibrium price. There's now a new equilibrium price, P1, right, P1. And now the output moves to QO. So we get to the optimum output either way. Think about what both of these mechanisms do. They both move the output to the right. Both of these solutions move the output to the right. And that's what the government's trying to do here. It's trying to get more vaccines into the population. And they could give it by giving a subsidy to the doctor. They could give it to the patient. We have this exact system working in our health system in Australia through Medicare. Every year around the start of winter, we have a flu vaccine season, and the flu vaccines are all subsidised. And what this means is that when people go to the doctor, they don't pay for the vaccine at all most of the time. If they do pay for it, they pay a lower price. You can get vaccinated on the university free. So that is a subsidy. It's being paid to the provider. The patient doesn't have to pay and then get the money back from government. The vaccines are subsidised en masse to the doctor. And the reason that we tend to subsidise suppliers rather than demanders is because it's simpler to administrate. If the government had to send a refund back to all the patients that got vaccinated, that would involve a lot of paperwork because you'd have to deal with every individual patient. But when they deal with the doctor, they just deal with the doctor, and that may cover thousands of patients. So it's really about which one is an easier way to operate that system. All right, we'll go back and we'll go back to our slide presentation now and think about the negative externalities. So when we're looking, so positive product. When we think about these production externalities, these are some examples where externalities exist, and governments may encourage these activities. Again, with something like on-the-job training, how could governments facilitate that? Well, they could move the demand curve to the right by giving the provider a subsidy so that the fees become cheap, and the supply curve moves to the right, and more people demand that course because the price simply allows them to do it. The lower price allows them to afford it. Okay, so we've done positive externalities. Now I want to deal with negative externalities. I'm just going to change this. Move my our cost curve, our label, and just show what happens when we have a social marginal cost involved. So if there's a negative externality, there will be a certain marginal cost, and that marginal cost will be a private marginal cost. This is the cost to the firm. This is a cost to the firm. So the firm is only ever thinking about the cost to themselves. They're thinking, what will it cost me to rent my premises? What will it cost me to buy my raw materials? What will it cost me to to pay my labour. But of course, there may be other costs. So, for example, each time this product is perhaps produced, then society may be impacted by a cost. This could be the cost of pollution, it could be the cost associated with smoking, but whatever that cost is, that marginal cost is the true marginal cost, because now we're accounting for the externality. The black arrow indicates how big that externality is. The black arrow indicates how big that is. So let's go down to our next diagram. We can see here that we've got on our diagram a market equilibrium. Here's our market equilibrium. But when we include a social cost, I'll do that in another colour. When we include a social cost instead of a private cost, the optimum equilibrium is now at a lower level of output. So we've got, as I said to you, in the market, at the market quantity, the market quantity is greater than the optimum quantity. So I want to, before we move forward here, I want to shade in this area in green. What's this green area represent? It represents the difference between the market equilibrium and the optimum equilibrium. And what we see is that for these areas in green, for all this production between QO and QM, for all of that production, the true marginal cost is greater than the marginal benefit. The true marginal cost is greater than the marginal benefit for all of those. Why is that? I've shaded it in slightly incorrectly here. I'm going to fix this. Sorry, I should have drawn it like this. But the area is the same. The amount of area is the same. So the difference between these two levels of output shows the true marginal cost is greater than the actual marginal benefit. And if that's the case, right, if that's the case, then this production is inefficient. And if it's inefficient, then what we actually have here is a dead weight loss. So if the government doesn't do anything about this equilibrium, if the government lets the equilibrium just operate in the market, it says we're not going to do anything here. We're just going to let the market operate. We're going to let the market produce at QM. Now there's an overproduction, right? At the market quantity, there's an overproduction. Too many goods are being made. Why are too many goods being made? Because we are not counting this social cost. We're ignoring that social cost. So originally, when we did interventions by government, we saw that they create a dead weight loss. But sometimes where there is an externality involved, not intervening creates a dead weight loss. So if we allow the market to operate here, right? If we allow the market to operate here, what we are not doing, right? What we're imagining is that the supply curve, the cost of production, is represented by the red line, when actually the true cost of production is represented by the black line. And if we're pretending that it's the red line, if we're pretending that the red line is our cost curve, then we're ignoring our externalities. And so the market equilibrium is failing. And that's why we have this area that I'm indicating here. That's the dead weight loss of not acting. So the dead weight loss of not intervening. So that's the dead weight loss associated with not intervening. If there's a big social issue created by a product, right? For example, e.g., smoking. If we just allow people to smoke and pretend that there's no negative effects of that smoking, which of course lots of countries will do, then that is that creates a dead weight loss. That's inefficient. What it basically means is, if the government doesn't intervene, too many people are smoking, and that's creating damage to society. So what can governments do here? Governments could do two things. What do governments in this country do? In the case of cigarette smoking, we have a demand curve. We have a supply curve. We have a demand curve. And if the government did not intervene in this market, then the price would be P and the quantity would be Q, and lots of people would be consuming this dangerous product, cigarettes, for example. And in this case, the price is too low and the quantity is too high. The price is too low, the quantity is too high. So what might governments do? They tax the producer. They tax cigarettes in this case, if we're thinking about that particular product. And now the supply curve, which is the social supply curve, but it now also becomes the private supply curve, because the difference between these two lines equals the tax. And hopefully the tax is equal to the negative externality. So what would happen there? The price moves up, and that price now reflects all the costs of production. So that's the optimum equilibrium. What should happen to the price of, if we're thinking about cigarettes, the price of cigarettes should go up. The quantity of cigarettes should go down, and now less people are smoking. Less people are smoking. Let me just talk to you very briefly about taxing something like cigarettes. What the government is doing here is saying these cigarettes are creating a social cost, and if we do nothing about it, the cost that the cigarette industry imposes on society is going to be forced onto lots of people. It's going to be forced onto everyone, including people who don't smoke. So what are we going to do? What we're going to do is make the cigarettes more expensive, so that now the cost of that cigarette not only includes the tobacco, packaging, advertising, everything that goes into making a cigarette, it also includes the healthcare costs. And so that if cigarette smokers want to smoke, we're not telling them they can't smoke. What we're telling them is, if you are going to smoke, you're going to pay the full cost of smoking, and you're not being able to flick that cost to someone who isn't a smoker. So this is not about banning cigarettes. This is about saying, if you are going to consume and make cigarettes, the price of that cigarette should include the true costs of that industry. And you want to smoke, that's your business, but you are now going to pay the full price. So the private cost now comes into line with the social cost, and at that point we say there is no dead weight loss anymore. Let's move on back to our presentation. On the other hand, what is another way that governments might intervene into something like cigarette smoking? What's another way that we do this in Australia? We know that there's a supply curve, there's a demand curve. Here's the free market, right? Here's the market quantity. Here's the market price. And what we know is that the optimum quantity is lower. We know that this product does damage. We know that the optimum quantity is lower than the market quantity. We know we want to reduce the number of people smoking. Now, one way that we did this in our previous diagram, we moved the supply curve up. You can see me making the arrow. We move the supply curve up. But another way, of course, might be if we want to move the quantity into QO, we could move the demand curve down. How could we move the demand curve down? Well, essentially what we do in Australia is we put restrictions on smoking. So what sort of restrictions? Well, you can't smoke in a workplace, you can't smoke at the university, you can't smoke in an airport, you can't smoke on a bus. So all of that, of course, moves the demand curve to the left because people have much less opportunity to smoke. And as a result of that, as well as advertising, we could also put, restrictions. We could also put advertising in there. If we could restrict people's demand for smoking, that would also move the equilibrium to EO. In theory, it would lower the price, but it would only lower the price because there's less demand for the product. So that would simply be the market forces in play, and because there would be a lower demand and a lower price, that would also reflect the market equilibrium. In both cases, what does the government want to do? They want to move the quantity to the left. They did it in the case where we imposed the tax. We moved the quantity to the left. I'm going over the arrow, right? We moved the quantity to the left. And in this case, we also moved the quantity to the left. So that's the intervention. Because where there is a negative externality, sometimes these goods are called demerit goods. And where those goods exist, in theory, we'd like to have less of them. So negative consumption externalities, in particular, bad driving. How do we do this? We tax cigarettes. We tax alcohol. So we do tax these ones, and of course Driving does create negative effects insofar as it creates pollution. With bad driving, how do we do this? Well, we intervene with fining bad drivers. All of those are going to increase the costs to the person who is drinking to excess, or who is smoking too much, or who's driving badly. They all have the effect of pushing up the cost of doing that activity. So that's really our that's really a summary of the way governments act in situations where there are many demanders and many suppliers, and it's not possible to negotiate a solution to an externality between two groups of people. So what we've done in the lecture so far is start with the idea of externalities, where someone's actions, a demander or a supplier, affect someone else. That's what the externality is. We started with the Coase theorem, where two people can negotiate with one another, and then we finished with much larger markets where it's not possible for to conduct negotiations with millions of people about vaccines or millions of people about smoking. We can't. That system won't work. Governments need to be involved. I want to take you back to the first one now, the Coase theorem, and I just want to do a little numerical example which might form a little bit of practice for doing an exam question, right? A multiple choice question or a Placonomics question. So I'm just going to finish off by going back to the Coase theorem, but I'm actually going to put some more specific numbers in here and try and get a slightly bigger sort of lesson economic principle out of our example. All right, so solutions to practice questions on the Coase theorem. How can society solve the problem of externalities? We're going back to just where the individuals are involved, and we go back to the Coase theorem. All right, let's just remind ourselves about what this is, where there are no transaction costs. This is a key one, right? In other words, no negotiators, no legal costs, right? I put that on the slide before. No legal costs. So you simply pay, one party pays another party in the transaction. And this should lead to an efficient level of output. So we're going to imagine here that we've got two. Sorry about this. Right, we've got an afternoon, a building in which there are two schools operating, right? The School of Rock and the School of Maths, and they are both next to each other in a building. And of course, with the School of Rock, if I've got the School of Rock, then these people are going to be making noise. And the School of Maths, of course, don't like that noise, right? So they want quiet. And straight away, we can see that there are externalities here. So, of course, the noise is an externality to the people who want quiet, but at the same time, quiet is going to be an externality. If I'm demanding quiet in my maths group, then that creates an externality to people who want to play music. So there, each one of them is creating an externality for the other, and it's going to be very hard for these people to exist at the same time. So let's just get the scenario here. They share a building, and now this is where the numbers come in. This is where the numbers come in. The School of Rock, right? They're creating loud music, and of course, if they are allowed to do this, they can earn $10,000 in tuition fees, and they make a lot of noise. But if they're forced to be quiet, they don't earn nothing. They don't earn nothing. They earn $2,000 if they have to be quiet. Why? How could they do this? Well, they could be playing, through headsets or something like that, and still doing their activity. But of course, it's not as good as just playing normally. So that's the situation for the School of Rock. And what I want you to see here, particularly for the School of Rock, and or particularly when we look at these examples, is the difference. The difference between noise and quiet for them is $8,000. Then we look at the School of Maths, and we see that the School of Maths can earn $14,000 if it's quiet. However, they're going to earn nothing if it's noisy, because these rock musicians are going to be making such a racket that no one can think when they're doing their maths examples. So for this group, their difference is $14,000. So the difference between quiet and noise for the School of Rock is less than the issue is for the School of Maths. And this will be the starting point of our negotiation. And then we think about the other aspect here, right? Let's think about the other aspect. Let's go back to our previous slide, and I'll do the numbers. I've got the numbers on the next slide. I'll clean up what we've done here because I want to highlight something else on here. I want you to think about what's the total earnings attached to noise, right? What's the total earnings attached to noise? If there's noise, the School of Rock gets $10,000 and the School of Maths gets nothing. So noise, right, the noise benefit, if you like, B, is $10,000. $10,000. Now, what about quiet, right? What's quiet worth in this scenario? Quiet's worth $2,000 to the School of Rock and $14,000 to the School of Maths. So this is $16,000. So then if we're contemplating the issue of economic efficiency, right? The economic efficiency, right, or the maximum benefit, which of these is going to get the tick, right? Which of these is going to ultimately be the solution? And I know what the solution is even before the negotiation starts. This will be the solution, right? There will be quiet. So if I'm doing this as an example in my through Playconomics or something, that's basically what I'm going to start with. I'm going to say, whoops, I'm very sorry about this. I didn't flick back carefully enough, but you've got the slides in front of you anyway. It's much more efficient for quiet to happen because the combined benefit of quiet is higher than the combined benefit of noise. So we start with that. We start with that situation. We just add them up. And as I said before I made that statement, I said we also have to look at the difference between quiet and noise for each group. And with that, once we know that difference, we know how much that the incentive is for that particular party to negotiate. Before we move on to the next slide, I want to talk very quickly about what a property right is. In this building, there's the School of Rock and the School of Noise. And if there's no property rights, it doesn't really matter. They will ultimately come to a solution. But a property right is where someone has the right to behave in a certain way. So you could say to the School of Rock, you have the right to make noise. And the School of Maths does not have the right to tell you to be quiet. So you have that right, and we're giving you that right. You can have the right to make noise. Or you could say to the School of Maths, you have the right to silence, and you can go down to the School of Rock if you want and tell them to be quiet. So that's what a property right is. But when we're thinking about the Coase theorem essentially says it doesn't matter who has the right, because if I am the School of Maths and you have and the School of Rock has the right to make noise, what I can do is go down to you and say, I know you have the right to make noise, but I'm going to buy you off. I'm going to pay you to be quiet. And the School of Rock, if you make them an offer that's big enough, then they'll do it. So let's see how this is going to play out. Okay, I'm pretty sure I've got the slide showing to you now. So we've done our scenario with the School of Rock and the School of Noise. We've seen that the most efficient outcome will be quiet. So if the School of Rock makes noise, the total tuition is $10,000. If the School of Rock is quiet, the total tuition, our totals are 10, right? So our totals are 10. Our totals are 16, so it's socially efficient to be quiet, and it's socially efficient to be quiet by a factor of $6,000. The School of Rock share a building, so we've got this scenario. So suppose the School of Maths has the right to be quiet. Suppose the School of Maths has the right to be quiet. The School of Rock will offer up to $8,000 to the School of Maths to buy the right to silence. Why will they offer up to $8,000? Because that's the difference between noisiness and quiet. So they will offer up to $8,000 to do that. But they can't offer any more than $8,000. They will offer up to $8,000 to do that. Let's imagine they do offer $8,000. They would then give up, the School of Maths would collect $8,000, but remember, if they have to be quiet and they accept $8,000, right, they give up their fees. They do get the $8,000 in compensation, but that is not enough to compensate them for their $14,000 in tutoring. So in that case, they're going to say, no, thank you, right? We're going to decline that offer. It's not enough because we're not going to give up $8,000. Our benefit would be $8,000. If we go back to the cost benefit, the benefit would be $8,000, but the cost would be $14,000. They're not going to do it. So the School of Maths will now earn $14,000. The School of Rock earns $2,000, and the total benefit is $16,000. And what this proves is that if the School of Maths has the right to be quiet, they're not going to sell the right. Therefore, the efficient result of the negotiation is silence. On the other hand, what if the School of Rock has the right to make noise? What's going to happen then? The School of Maths could offer $8,000 plus. Let's make it e.g., right? They can offer more than $8,000. They can offer $9,000. So let's say they offer $9,000 to the School of Maths. They offer $9,000 to the School of Rock. Now, what's going to happen here is that the School of Rock will say, okay, if we are going to be quiet, we can't earn $10,000, but we can get $9,000 in compensation. We can still earn $2,000 in quiet. So what that means is that our total income is now $11,000, right? $11,000. 11. And before, when they were noisy, they could only earn 10. So their net gain is $1,000. So they're going to accept that offer. They're going to say, fine, sure, thanks. We'll take your $9,000. We'll take your $9,000 and then we'll be quiet. And we'll still teach in the quiet and we'll earn another $2. So we'll turn our income from 9 to 11. Now, what about the School of Maths? The School of Rock, they make the offer of $8,000 plus. So let's imagine, we already said here, they're going to offer them $9,000 just for argument's sake. They'll offer them $9,000. The School of Rock will accept the offer, and so it will be quiet. The School of Maths earns $14,000 minus 9 now, $14,000 minus 9, but it's a better result than 0. It's a better result than 0 if they were to not make that offer at all. So they will. They're not going to earn $14,000 anymore. They're going to earn. They're going to earn 5. But in the end, both parties will gain here. Both parties will gain. If I go back and I can do it more cleanly on the first diagram. What's going to happen in our second negotiation? Our second negotiation, the School of Rock. What is the School of Rock going to earn now? They're not going to earn $10,000. They're going to earn $9,000. Their total income is $11,000. Okay. And what's the school going to earn? The school is going to earn $14,000 minus $9,000 because they've paid that to the School of Rock. So they're going to earn $5,000, and that equals $16,000. And as we saw at the start, the greatest benefit will be when there is quiet, and the total benefit is $16,000. The total benefit is $16,000. So although the School of maths is earning less money, that's the best option for them because the School of Rock had the right to make noise. So the way the money is shared has changed, but the result will be the same. In either case, there will be quiet. The School of Maths can afford to buy the School of Rock. They can afford to buy rights to the School of Rock, but the School of Rock cannot afford to buy rights from the School of Maths. So I'm going to finish the lecture there today. There are some other examples I'm going to give you on Monday, and they are sitting at the bottom of our slide presentation. We're running a bit short of time here, and I will tidy those slides up to make them a little bit clearer when I present them. That will finish off chapter 9. They're just numerical practice examples. Before the exam, we can consider them a review, if you like. Just going back to the Coase theorem and the examples we did previously, the Coase theorem states that an efficient outcome will be negotiated. And what we just saw in the example that we saw, what we just saw in the example that I gave you regarding the School of Rock and School of Maths, is that we did arrive at an efficient solution, which was to have quiet. Why was it the efficient solution? Because it had the greatest net benefit when there was quiet. The Coase theorem says, irrespective of who has the rights. That doesn't mean that the rights are irrelevant. We saw in the example there that it was much better for the school if you had the rights to begin with. You were in a better negotiating position. So it's much better to have the rights than not have the rights. But following on from that, irrespective of who does have that right, you will wind up with the best solution overall. Who has the rights will impact on how that benefit is shared, but it doesn't impact on what the actual result will be, which was, in the case we saw, there will be quiet. So I'm going to leave the lecture now. I will do the last lecture on Monday. We'll be doing chapter 10. That will be short. Once I finish chapter 10, I'll do some practice examples with you. One thing that I will do is do the examples, the numerical examples regarding government intervention in the case of externalities. I might revise a little bit more on the monopoly topic. I wasn't quite as clear as I wanted to be in explaining part of that. So I might redo that and do a numerical example with that as well. So happy studying between now and Monday. I'm sure you've got lots to do in the course getting ready for the exam. So thanks for your attention this morning.